includes some mixed use with commercial and industrial activities. So sort of bring us directly to the dessert. The concept of the master plan. We have a residential neighborhood organized around a central linear park with connections outside of the neighborhood with mixed use activities and different activities that shelter the project. And this stems from the need for us to sort of address several different elements on the site. First of which being connectivity and connections outside of the site. The site is presently very enclaved by barriers. We have a rail line, very busy interfaces, industrial activities all around us, and the canal itself. And so we propose to open the site towards Point St. Charles and towards Griffintown. Towards Point St. Charles by connecting Oak to St. Patrick at Wellington, and towards Griffintown by reusing the Wellington Tunnel, which is currently closed. It is a historical tunnel from 1931 that has 4 lanes and is just simply closed at one end. So this would be a direct access sort of from the downtown core directly into our site, which would alleviate some of the traffic problems with Wellington Bridge and Mill Street being very busy during rush hours, connecting to the Victoria Bridge. Now in terms of opening our site itself, we want to open the site towards the canal and highlight the historic Wellington Basin. Now of course the Wellington Basin, as we see on the map, is about 10 times the size of what we're proposing in terms of width, because it takes up the lion's share of our site. But we want to highlight that length and bring it back towards Bridge to open the site, and create a park that structures our residential neighborhoods around it. Another thing that we sort of are seeking to replicate or to seek inspiration from is the morphology along the Lachine Canal. It's punctuated by by silos, which we find on our site, but also by very large blocks, very large buildings along the canal itself, and in behind a finer grain. So we find smaller blocks, smaller buildings, and a finer grain within the neighborhood, which we can see is even repeated in the building facades themselves, to sort of take the rhythm of the neighborhoods around us. Now, as we see in the master plan, the density grows as we get towards our park in the center and towards the canal. And this was, of course, to take advantage of views, to take advantage of public spaces, and to bring the density from a relatively low industrial density towards Griffintown, so that there's actually a harmony across the water. And our public park, which I mentioned is our structuring axis, I'm standing on the board, we want to use industrial materials in the park itself to sort of highlight its past. We'd like to use water as an element from the canal down, and use different rail lines and different materials from its industrial past to highlight the features and the history of the site, and as well as give it a contemporary feel. And we also have a public park, which is less for the neighborhood, and well, it's still for the neighborhood, but it has a more regional character along the Lachine Canal. And in that park, at the top of the plan on the side, you'll see the silos. We aim to build a recreational center and activity center around the silos, because that's a location in our site that connects to the public Lachine Canal corridor, as well as buffers sort of isolates the residential towers behind it from that public access. On the left-hand side, we see the basin, which is going to be our water feature, which separates our site and sort of gives our larger sites along the canal an added value. And continuing down, we have the linear park with a more neighborhood feel and with more local features, gardens, and different physical attributes. So along the linear park, in the lower section, we're framing the park with buildings 8 stories high so that it feels relatively well enclosed, but because of the park setback, it will still be at a human scale. And we see different landscaping for a neighborhood use rather than a regional use. So paving stones, benches, gardens, rain gardens, and things that will have a local character in that space and add value and bring the canal in towards the park. And finally, transit and transportation. Our site is an enclave. It is separated by barriers, and it is disconnected from Point St. Charles residential areas, as well as across from the canal from Griffintown. So we need to consider Bixie, Camino-Tow, and bus, and even the possibility of regional SLR traffic, SLR train station, to connect us as well. It's one thing to have the road to the tunnel, but it's another thing to take advantage of them. So we planned 3 Camino-Tow stations, 4 Bixie stops, and we're going to take advantage of the bus routes that run down Wellington and Bridge and Bill, and hopefully bring buses into our neighborhood. Now, in terms of maintaining a character that's not just car-oriented, for our main Oak Street extension, we'd like to keep the street at a relatively small footprint that has a heavy emphasis on pedestrian walkability, and that actually communicates to the cars that this is not an area to drive through, this is an area to go slow, so that the street will be relatively well framed with the taller buildings, and have still allow for a variety of different modes. Now in terms of housing types in the neighborhood, I'm going to start with social housing, which is the smallest but not the least important. Point St. Charles currently has 1,700 people on a waiting list for social housing. These are people that can't rent at the market rates in the community or can't find suitable lodgings for their family. And we see that as the site is offering an opportunity to provide 300 new units for this community. Moving on to affordable. One thing we've considered for the site was we wanted to always keep it affordable and keep it viable, because the site is going to require sort of a pioneers to first arrive, and we want to keep it affordable in the Sud-West. We don't want to have everything falling into luxury, although we do have the canal. So with 29% of the luxury, 37% is the lion's share of our condo developments. This mirrors what's happening in Griffintown and other central areas, where there's a heavy focus in sort of 6, 8, and 10-story concrete buildings, and this is where we'll be stacking most of the medium-priced units. So the luxury units will be along the canal, social housing in different clusters for different needs, family, seniors, and otherwise, and the medium to affordable around the outsides, with a good blend, and a good blend throughout all the phases. So Laura will speak to phasing a little bit later. In terms of housing types, we see towers along the water, medium to high density along our park and towards the canal, and as well as social housing built around a courtyard. We've located this here for the reason that it gives us a courtyard ambiance for the social housing units, as well as there's a building we can preserve and keep as a community space, which is lacking in the neighborhood that has no residents, but will be definitely needed. And this space we feel could be managed through the cooperative and benefit the whole community. On Bridge Street, we see the opportunity for retail spaces and to mirror the brick and the morphology and different architectural elements that we find along Bridge. There are several buildings that are brick, 2 or 3 stories, and we would like to see commercial in that form go to buffer our neighborhood from the nuisances along Bridge, as well as provide retail spaces and opportunities for our clients with office spaces above. And finally, our industrial productive spaces. We're aiming to have some cargo container architecture to have a tie-in with the portuary activity, and as well to allow for flexible spaces at a low cost. We have this at a low cost in terms of the short term for the tenants if they want to expand or change the square footage that they're renting, and as well the long term, because the site is surrounded by several different industrial areas that may change in the long term. Our plan is currently for 8 years for our phasing, but in the long term, with the Bonaventure changing, with different things changing in the surrounding areas and in Point St. Charles, we see this as a way to connect to something different, while at the same time sheltering our project currently. And so several lot sizes, again, bigger along the canal, smaller grade towards the south, and with the density rising towards the park space in the canal, to sort of maximize profitability, take advantage of our park spaces, and to have a coherent form overall. And now I will invite our Chief Financial Officer to explain the cash details of our plan. Thank you.
As one of the people who participated in the preparation of the cash flow analysis, I will talk a little bit about the financial side of the Wellington Grove project. I will use my, okay. Just before that, I would like to present to you the phases that we decided to follow. We will have 8 phases in total, as each phase will be 1 year long. In phase 1 and 2, we will start with the development of the western part and the center of our site, including the opening of Oak Street, train underpass, and the first part of the linear park. In phase 3 to 6, we will continue with the rest of the center, and we will head north by constructing the second part of the linear park together with the first tower building on north on our side. Although the city of Montreal is responsible for the landscaping of the park, we have included them in the phasing. Then we will finalize our project with phases 7 and 8, and we'll build our second tower building along the Ocean Canal, and also the commercial spaces which are on Mill Street and Bridge Street. In our performance analysis, we worked with two scenarios, with and without subsidies. The subsidies that we rely on receiving will be for soil decontamination through Climasol and for city-paid roads in front of social housing. By receiving those subsidies, we will be able to cut down our total project cost with almost $8 million. Which will pay off in higher net present value and return on investment. As you see on the chart, we will be able to make up to 17.9% return on investment with subsidies. Now let's see how our investment is distributed over time. With blue, we indicate our investment in each phase, while in red, we compare the revenue that we receive. And based on our estimations, we will make the largest benefits in the second, fourth, and seventh phase. About the prices, we based our prices on a market research, and we will try to provide affordable housing, as our prices for affordable housing would be $3,200 per square meter, for medium $3,800, and for luxury housing $48,000. So we feel that we are basing our prices on the realities of the site and what is competitive in the sector. The fact that our project is profitable even with cheaper prices makes us even more confident that we will be able to successfully accomplish our project even with softening national housing market. And since we wanted to check how much we can go in our profit, we did sensitivity analysis, and we tested 3 different rates of increase in our market units: 5%, 10%, and 15%. And as you can see, we go high in our revenues, as the highest we can go is 25.4 as return on investment. Now, Mark.
Okay, thank you. So now that we know that our project is viable, flexible, and can deal with the realities of the evolving market saturation and the surroundings, we feel that we're ready to move forward with further development phases to bring people into the site and to develop this part of the canal as a stepping stone into the city and as an important junction and a hinge along the canal. Thank you very much.
You'll also get this in the package, the liner at the end.
So, okay, I have questions. See, you neutralize them with your question.
Just drop them at the end.
Just reading the brochure.
Perfect sales job. Mostly said Gary and Ross.
What do we say?
That's it. You got it right.
That's what we like to hear.
Quick question for me. Commercial, there's about 150,000 feet of commercial. Is that mainly on mill and
Yep, so
bridges?
commercial here, 3 stories, first floor retail, second and third floor office, and then the other commercial commercial section is here, again, 3-story, 4-story, productive use.
These are containers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Container.
That's 150,000, just these.
For those,
Sorry.
yeah.
Question is, how do you access into, what's the road system? There's one entrance from Bridge Street.
So there's an entrance off Bridge here, which takes you through the site. There's access off of Mill, and this, our proposal extends Oak Street through under an underpass under the rail, connecting it to St. Patrick, as well as opening up the Wellington Tunnel, which is currently closed.
In terms of social distribution, I know you have low income area for low income people, but how about families versus smaller?
I could,
Yeah, you want to talk about the unit size?
families, unit size, we tried to cluster unit size around the edges where we had lower density to keep families in lower density, like 4-story walk-ups and 4-story buildings. So there's the larger units and the more family-focused units in the affordable category are there, with some in the medium along Oak and below the Rue Saint-Etienne. In terms of social housing, we viewed this spot for families as well as this one. These were 3 spots. This one specifically because of the courtyard and the access to a public park. When we stacked it with bigger units, 6.5s, 5.5s, as well as 4.5s. And the luxury buildings, we put bigger suites towards the canal, but that's of course we're in a different price range.
And is all the parking underground?
Some of them
Yeah.
is,
Stand us up.
yes. Maybe on that map is difficult. Do you want to put the zoom plan of the park? Oh, okay, maybe this. We have parking on the street. We made some pochette stationnement on the street, so you have parking underground. You have parking, surface parking here. It follows cross section over here. We are making some parking underneath the patio. So it's halfway from the surface and from the underground, and there's a large patio over here to for the people. So we have both. We have we have 3 kind of parking on the street, surface and underground.
Nick, any comments?
Sure, good work. It's hard to be the first project because we don't have a frame of reference yet. I just wanted to commend you for good representations and use of precedents. When you presented precedents, but you didn't talk as explicitly about them. I think that's really important in any kind of project like this, to say, this is what we've done here, this sort of thing. Went into a little bit of detail on the cargo crate architecture. The question that I have for you is about the enclave quality of it, and you're talking about phasing because there are changes that are taking place, it's an area transformation. I don't think we know enough about, we haven't told us enough about what's on the other side of Bridge Street and so on and so forth, so that we can understand why that commercial office mixed use makes sense there. And more importantly, what's going to happen for, let's say, this is an 8-year project, what if nothing happens on the other side of Bridge Street for another 20 years? Do we end up with what we saw in the early 20th century in a lot of North American cities where we have streets that have, that are single loaded in effect? So I don't know if you can speak to that.
Well, we have already Little Quebec, that is a new office building,
Yeah.
and we have some new building here. So we believe that this will be in continuity of what is happening on both sides. And if, we believe that we have a density of 205, the net density is 205
Yeah.
per acre.
Just
253.
250.
Okay, so with all the people over here, we think that some details would be,
I guess just to jump on and add sort of to what's going on around. In the sort of along the Canal Point St. Charles, this is being bought up by, this is industrial land being bought up by residential developers that are, so it continues to be industrial because it's still profitable. Down here is, there's some commercial in the Costco with a big parking lot, so that's sort of there to stay surrounded by the train yards. And this block here has been bought by a commercial real estate developer, but there's been no plans as of yet, so we're sort of surrounded by commercial activities currently.
That's great. Can I just redirect? Can you show me the phasing slide? Just because I'm going to insist on the bridge question. Okay, can you tell me when that stuff on bridge appears? When does it?
The last
This- yeah.
Last is the 8th year, because a retail street, a mixed-use street functions as we see in a shopping mall. It thrives, the commercial activity can only thrive when there's stuff going on both sides. So I think that there should be a very careful strategizing around that, not just in terms of the phasing. It's good that you brought that in the last moment, but you probably know that retail is probably the hardest part to bring into
Yeah.
any kind of new greenfield or brownfield project, unless you are willing to give people 100,000 square foot floor plates.
There is this nice building over here that it would be nice that it would be converted to retail offices.
Okay.
So,
And our retail was limited to approximately 2,000 square meters of floor space.
Okay.
So we tried to keep it as,
Well, what's
keep
above
as
it?
mid.
Is there something above it?
Above it, offices and other space.
first floor is retail and for the second to fourth.
Which, as the project goes on, if something happens on the other side, that could be a good opportunity for a mixed-use building if there's a response across the street. But
See, where I would argue with Dick is I find, I mean, I like this, but I find that the phasing is just too linear, and it's a good hypothesis, but you can play around with it, because if you're offering, you know better than I do, Stefan, about this, but if you're offering several different housing types, you can actually start several phases at the same time, without calling them sequential phases. They are nonetheless phases. So you can open up a pocket of this type of housing there and a pocket of this type of housing there, and that's where I think that the commercial, once this master plan was approved, you would be in the market for commercial right off the bat. Now, maybe it wouldn't happen for a long time. If somebody walked in your door and said, yeah, I would like some space along Bridge Street because the traffic count there is unbelievable, you'd build it tomorrow. You wouldn't wait for a later phase. So I think that the phasing is something that can actually it can overlap. And one of the issues that came up in the class is, okay, there's phases and there's phases. There's phases on the land basis, which you have here. And then there's phases within each one of those pockets. You really can't bring more than 100 units onto the market at a shot, basically, unless you're going to build up some massive inventory. So that just adds a layer of complexity to the thing, but I just wanted to point out that these don't have to be on the land basis, they don't have to be sequential like that. The other thing is the sensitivity analysis, which is always a great thing to do. Go to that slide. I think that's why, go back one. Just go back one for a second. One more.
As we stick.
One more. That's a good one. I like that one very much. Now go to the sensitivity analysis. Good. And there, now sensitivity analysis, see what happens if prices go down. Right? Not if prices go up. I mean, that doesn't hurt too, but both. But I mean, you really want to see what happens to your return when the market starts to wobble on you. And you say, oh, this is either going to take a lot longer than we thought, or the prices are not going to escalate the way we thought they were going to be. What happens to our return on investment then? And because you plotted that other graph where you have annual, that's a really good basis to build up a sensitivity analysis if things start to go sideways. So just keep that in mind. It's not just a matter of prices going up.
I think we started really low, but it's a good point to start.
Well, it's always good to start though. I mean, you have a conservative approach, and then you say what happens if it really doesn't materialize what we thought. And so you have that sensitivity at the worst case, but the upside is also very nice to understand as well. So I think that's good. That's good comment. I'd be curious to go back to the phasing chart again. I think it's interesting how you introduce this first phase as being the one against the train tracks and being the one that's really at the core, the heart of the project per se. And that's a challenge, in my opinion, especially if you create a statement, well, that works well. I'd be curious to hear what the panel has to say, but if you had introduced a first phase closer to the canal and really advertise this is coming up here, this is what we're doing, like your phase 4. I understand that's the luxury units though, not that perhaps that's where there's a contradiction. I don't know how you manage that. But to have a strong element that's a bit of a signature component as one of the first phases, that's a nice item to have, because then you say, this is coming, this is what this is going to be.
Well, we thought that
so you defend your
Yeah.
point very clearly. Yeah.
And as well as the tunnel, because the tunnel won't be an overnight, won't be a 1 year. We sort of estimated that to come in the early phases, but as we're building.
So does your project include an allocation of the tunnel opening?
Yeah, we allocated money towards the tunnel and also expected the city or the city to contribute to that.
Did you say there's wood somewhere? There's wood structures and concrete? 4 stories, you were
Yeah.
saying 4 wood?
Well, we have 4 stories, these are 4 stories building that are represented over here. And we have 8 stories building in front.
Okay, so the 4 is wood?
Yes.
Potentially? Okay. That's a good differentiator if you want to make affordable units, because you were talking about selling affordable units at $320 a foot. In concrete, it's pretty much impossible
Yeah.
in today's world with such a complex project. And just to let you know, 20% return to start a project is not enough. Nobody would start such a risky project on a 20% return on investment. It's got to be 1.5 to double that to start, because then it doesn't go as well as you plan. This project, based on 200 units a year with 1 to 2 year planning, is a 12-year project. It's not an 8-year project. Based on 200 absorption a year plus 2-year planning. 200 is 2,000 units, right?
Yeah, 300 per social,
So
which we,
it could be done in parallel.
yeah.
Right.
Maybe, so it's probably gonna be more than 8 years. If you're starting with 20% return on equity,
It's on investment.
It's on investment.
on investment.
And it's not IRR, that's on net present value. If it was IRR, that would be distorted.
Okay, so it includes financing,
Yeah,
Yes,
it's return on sales.
that's right.
with
It's
90%.
basically,
Yeah, we did not impose a minimum limit of return on investment. It says that we said yield from sales.
minus the cost. Yeah.
Minus, basically, we said, don't dare go under 12 or even not that project. But you're right, that
17 is very good.
but when we mentioned equity, we of course talked about that.
Yeah, this is not, we've reached and it's not, and
Revenue minus cost.
basically, it's gross margin. Right? These are good numbers for gross margin. Yeah.
Very good.
And I think it's a good idea to start also your project in development with public space because it's a company. I think the layout seems to be quite clear, straightforward. But I wonder, did you do any signage shade study? Did you consider?
You speak to jump one slide, the third, yeah, I think it's the third slide.
Just 1 second. There we
Oh,
go.
so-
Oh, okay. My concern is that in some areas, some of the public space or the courtyards will be in shade because of the way the building has been laid out. For example,
These two buildings.
yeah,
Two buildings on Bridge Street, on Rue Saint-Étienne.
on Saint-Étienne, for example.
These two buildings, the U-shaped building, they should be turned.
Yeah, exactly. If you turn them around, first of all, you'll have the end perspective with the facade, and also the public space will get more sun.
That's a good point. We had designed it that way just to block it from Bridge Street, but based on,
Yeah, the commercial buildings.
We wanted to shelter the buildings from the reasons, so that's why we oriented the buildings.
Yeah, but then you have the commercial buildings that shelter the
That's
space anyways.
I would also just try and come to, and I would probably also, if you have a big park with your silos, I'm wondering if you would have wanted more facade on that park and on the Lachine Canal as well.
Yeah.
You have a very linear,
Yeah, well, that was our cost.
that was your concept, yes,
So
there's a
we
lot
have
of
the facade,
views